We got to finish the job, right? Over the past 11 days, our military has virtually destroyed Iran.
A shortage of aluminium is impacting the supply of wide range of goods in the US. Experts say it means average Americans are having to pay much more for the basic.
For the first time in history, Iranian officials say the country has closed the Strait of Hormuz following joint strikes from the U.S. and Israel. While this is not an officially recognized closure, shipping has been completely stalled in the strait.
It's surprising how something as overlooked as aluminum can suddenly start shaping the cost of everyday life. From cars and houses to soda cans and appliances, this metal sits quietly inside countless products. Yet right now, it's becoming a key reason why prices are shifting again. While many people thought inflation was finally cooling, a deeper transformation has been unfolding behind the scenes, one that is now starting to ripple across the economy. What makes this situation unusual isn't just rising costs, but how quickly the supply chain has changed. For decades, the United States and Canada functioned almost like a single aluminum system. Trade moved so smoothly between them that it barely felt international. Factories, logistics networks, and production plans were built on the assumption that this steady flow would continue indefinitely. That assumption changed almost overnight. The major trigger was a sharp increase in tariffs, which jumped from 25% to 50%. The most efficient and affordable supply route became significantly more expensive. This wasn't a slow adjustment, it was a sudden shift that forced companies to rethink their strategies immediately. Before this change, the level of dependence between the two countries was extremely high. In 2024, Canada exported around $14 billion worth of aluminum, and roughly 94% of it went to the United States. That kind of concentration meant that entire industries relied on a stable and uninterrupted flow of material. When tariffs disrupted that flow, the effects were bound to be widespread. Instead of gradually scaling back shipments, Canadian producers took a different approach. They began quietly restructuring their global relationships. Contracts were renegotiated, shipments redirected, and long-term deals signed with new buyers. The biggest winner in this transition wasn't another North American country, it was Europe. This shift wasn't just about geography. Europe's demand is increasingly focused on low-carbon aluminum, and that's where Canada has a strong advantage. In provinces like Quebec, aluminum production is powered largely by hydroelectric energy, resulting in a much lower carbon footprint compared to production that relies on coal or natural gas. As environmental standards tighten, this difference becomes a major selling point. The numbers highlight how quickly things changed. At the start of 2025, about 95% of Quebec's aluminum exports were still going to the United States. Within months, that figure dropped to around 78%. While Europe's share rose to nearly 18%, that's not a temporary fluctuation, it's a structural shift that could last for years. What makes it even more significant is how difficult it is to reverse such transitions. Manufacturers don't switch suppliers lightly, they build long-term strategies around contracts, logistics, and regulatory compatibility once Canadian aluminum becomes integrated into European automotive. In aerospace industries, it becomes part of a stable system designed to last. Even if tariffs were reduced later, there is no guarantee that trade would simply revert to its previous patterns. In the United States, the goal behind the tariffs was straightforward: make imports more expensive so domestic production becomes more competitive. But aluminum production isn't easy to scale. Producing a single metric ton requires about 1,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. That makes energy costs the most critical factor in determining where aluminum can be produced efficiently. This is where geography plays a decisive role. Countries like Canada, Norway, and Iceland dominate aluminum production not because they have more raw materials, but because they have access to abundant, low-cost hydroelectric power. In contrast, electricity in many parts of the United States can cost 30% to 50% more than in Canada. That difference alone can determine whether a smelter stays open or shuts down. As a result, the tariffs didn't trigger a surge in domestic production as intended. Instead, they ran into the physical and economic limits of the industry. By 2025, the number of operational primary aluminum smelters in the United States had dropped to historically low levels, with only a few still running, and even fewer operating at full capacity. The supply gap that tariffs were supposed to close remained wide open. This gap didn't stay confined to the aluminum sector. Aluminum is a foundational material used across the entire industrial economy, from car manufacturing and construction to packaging and aerospace. When the cost of such a key input rises, the effects ripple outward in every direction. Manufacturers are forced to either absorb higher costs or pass them on to consumers. One clear sign of this pressure is the Midwest premium, which reflects the extra cost American buyers pay above global aluminum prices. After the tariffs were imposed, this premium surged, effectively raising the baseline cost of aluminum. Across the domestic market, as a result, everything from vehicle parts to building materials became more expensive to produce. The consequences are becoming increasingly visible. Companies operating on thin margins can't absorb rising costs indefinitely. Over time, these pressures show up in the form of slower production, delayed projects, and even job losses. Estimates suggest that tens of thousands of jobs have been affected in industries heavily dependent on aluminum, including automotive manufacturing and construction. At the same time, as Canadian supply shifted away and domestic production struggled to expand, the United States began sourcing aluminum from other regions, particularly the Middle East. Countries like the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain have larger-scale smelters powered by relatively affordable energy, making them viable alternatives on paper. This solution introduces a new kind of risk. Instead of relying on a neighboring country with integrated infrastructure, the supply chain now stretches across long distances and passes through critical choke points like the Strait of Hormuz. This isn't just a busy shipping route, it's also a geopolitical hotspot where disruptions can occur with little warning. As supply chains become more stretched and complex, they also become more fragile. Delays, bottlenecks, and unexpected interruptions become more likely. In a market where inventory levels are already tight, even small disruptions can have outsized effects. Some reports suggest that under certain conditions, U.S. aluminum inventories could drop to dangerously low levels within weeks. That may sound extreme, but the country relies on imports. For nearly half of its aluminum consumption, any disruption doesn't create a slow squeeze. It triggers a rapid imbalance between supply and demand. This fragility is compounded by geopolitical tensions. If conflicts or instability affect key supplier regions, shipments could slow or stop entirely. Since these regions are now helping replace Canadian supply, the system has lost a level of stability. When shipments from distant regions take up to 60 days to arrive, but inventory lasts only 30 days, companies are left in a precarious position. Even when alternative suppliers exist, redirecting shipments takes time that production lines simply don't have. Restarting domestic production isn't a quick fix either. Aluminum smelters require continuous operation, stable energy supplies, and significant investment. Once a facility shuts down, bringing it back online can take anywhere from 6 months to a year. This creates a structural limitation where short-term shortages can't be solved quickly, leaving the system heavily dependent on imports. Even as those imports become less predictable, the impact of these constraints spreads across industries in ways that are easy to underestimate. Aluminum isn't just another commodity. It's a core material used in everything from aircraft components and vehicle frames to beverage cans and household appliances. When supply tightens, all of these sectors feel the strain simultaneously. In sectors like defense, the stakes are even higher. Advanced systems rely on specialized aluminum alloys that can't be easily replaced without compromising performance or safety. In this context, supply disruptions aren't just economic, they're strategic. Recent data shows that Canada is becoming less reliant on the United States overall. By 2025, the U.S. share of Canadian exports had dropped to around 72%, while shipments to other regions reached record levels. This suggests a broader diversification strategy is underway, one that reduces dependence on a single market. This shift carries long-term consequences. Once supply chains are reoriented and contracts are established, they create stability that makes reversal unlikely. Even if tariffs are rolled back, trade flows may not return to previous levels. Short-term policy decisions can reshape global markets for years. At the same time, analysts warn that global aluminum markets could face significant supply deficits if disruptions persist and production remains constrained. When shortages reach that scale, prices don't just rise gradually. They can spike sharply, adding further pressure to already strained industries.